My daughter-in-law stood up and gave me a cruel speech. "You're too old to think your little business will ever succeed. At your age, you should be thinking about death, not dreams." Even my son laughed. But what happened next turned their laughter into tears. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The business valuation appointment was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10. I chose my best suit, charcoal gray with a silk blouse, the outfit I wore when meeting new clients for the first time. Professional armor, Robert used to call it, back when I was climbing the corporate ladder at the insurance company. That was before I understood that some battles couldn't be won with the right clothes. Julie Davis arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather briefcase and an air of competent efficiency that reminded me why I'd chosen her firm. She was perhaps 50, with silver threading through her black hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, extending a firm handshake. "Thank you for reaching out to Klein & Associates. I understand you'd like a comprehensive valuation of Harmony Home Solutions." I led her to my office, suddenly seeing it through professional eyes. The converted bedroom was modest but organized. Filing cabinets lined one wall, my desk positioned to catch natural light from the window, a small seating area where I conducted client consultations. My certifications hung in simple frames: Life Coach certification from the International Coach Federation, Professional Organizer certification, Small Business Management certificate from the local community college. "Tell me about your business," Julie said, settling into the chair across from my desk with a notepad and tablet. For the next 3 hours, I laid out everything: my client acquisition methods, word of mouth, community bulletin boards, partnerships with local real estate agents, my service offerings, initial consultations, comprehensive home organization, ongoing life coaching, maintenance visits, my financial records, which I'd meticulously maintained since day one. "Your retention rate is remarkable," Julie noted, scrolling through the spreadsheets I'd provided. 93% of your clients continue service for at least 12 months. "I don't just organize their closets," I explained. "I help them understand why their spaces became disorganized in the first place. Usually it's about life transitions, divorce, death, job loss, children leaving home. Once they learn the underlying patterns, they can maintain the systems themselves. And these testimonials," she continued, reading from a folder of client feedback. "Listen to this one. Eleanor didn't just organize my house, she organized my life. After my husband's death, I was drowning in paperwork, possessions, and grief. She helped me see that keeping everything wasn't honoring his memory. Letting go was. This is powerful stuff." I felt a flush of pride, quickly followed by a stab of anger as I remembered Jessica's dismissive words. "My daughter-in-law calls it a cute hobby." Julie looked up sharply. "Hobby? Mrs. Patterson, based on your revenue streams, client base, and growth trajectory, this is a legitimate business enterprise. More than that, it's positioned for significant expansion." "Expansion? Your methodology is replicable. You could franchise this, develop online courses, write books. The organizing industry is worth billions, and life coaching is growing 20% annually. You've created something that bridges both markets." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "But I'm 70. So what?" Julie's voice was matter of fact. Laura Ingalls Wilder didn't publish her first Little House book until she was 64. Grandma Moses didn't start painting until her 70s. Age isn't a liability in this business. It's an asset. Your clients trust you because of your life experience, not despite it. Ours? She spent another hour analyzing my financial records, taking notes, asking detailed questions about my methods and materials. When she finished, she closed her laptop and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I'll have a preliminary assessment for you by Monday," she said. "But I can tell you right now, this isn't a hobby. This is a business with serious potential." After she left, I sat in my office feeling strangely untethered. For years, I'd thought of Harmony Home Solutions as my small contribution to the world, a way to feel useful while earning enough to maintain my independence. The idea that it might be worth something significant had never seriously occurred to me. My phone buzzed with a text from Finley. Hope you're thinking about our conversation. The Hampton house won't wait forever. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Friday brought my usual client appointments. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose grown children had left behind decades of accumulated belongings. Mr. Thompson, recently widowed and overwhelmed by his wife's extensive craft supplies. Each session reminded me why I loved this work. The moment when chaos transformed into clarity, when clients realized they could take control of their environment and, by extension, their lives. "You're different today," Mrs. Rodriguez observed as we sorted through old photo albums. "More, I don't know, purposeful." I paused, a wedding picture from 1987 in my hands. "I had my business evaluated this week." "Evaluated? Like, to see what it's worth?" "Something like that." She studied my face with the shrewd intelligence of a woman who'd raised 5 children and run a household on a teacher's salary. "And it's worth more than people told you it was, isn't it?" I smiled. The first genuine smile I'd felt since my birthday. "We'll see." That weekend, I called David and Sarah. Not to complain about Finley and Jessica. I'd never been the type of mother to pit her children against each other. But I needed to hear their voices, to remember what it felt like to be seen as more than a burden or a bank account. "How was your birthday?" Sarah asked. She was 35, a pediatric resident who somehow found time to call me twice a week despite working 80-hour shifts. "Quiet," I said. "Finley and Jessica came by." A pause. Sarah had always been perceptive, even as a child. I'd adopted her and David when they were 8 and 10. Siblings who'd been in the foster system for 3 years after their parents died in a car accident. Broken, traumatized children who'd taught me that love could be chosen, not just inherited. "Everything okay, Mom?" "Everything's fine. Tell me about your rotation." We talked for an hour about her work in the NICU, her plans for a pediatric fellowship, her boyfriend who was also a doctor, and who treated her with the kind of respect I'd forgotten was possible. Before we hung up, she said something that made my chest tight. "Mom, I know I don't say it enough, but what you've built with your business, it's incredible. Watching you start over after Dad died, create something that helps people, it inspires me every day." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen holding the phone, feeling the weight of the contrast. My biological son saw my work as an embarrassment. My adopted daughter saw it as inspiration. Monday morning, Julie called. "Mrs. Patterson, could you come in this afternoon? I'd like to discuss my findings in person." Her office was downtown, in a glass building that made me feel simultaneously important and intimidated. Julie's desk was mahogany, her diplomas impressively framed, her entire demeanor suggesting someone who dealt in serious money. "Before I share the numbers," she said, "I want you to understand that this assessment is based on current operations. If you were to scale according to the growth plan we discussed, the valuation would be significantly higher." She opened a folder and placed a single sheet of paper in front of me. I stared at the number at the bottom of the page, read it again, blinked hard and read it a third time. "That's—" I stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Conservative," Julie said, "based on your client retention rate, revenue growth over the past 3 years, and the replicable nature of your methodology. A buyer wouldn't just be purchasing a client list, they'd be buying a proven system." The number was larger than the house Finley and Jessica wanted me to finance, larger than my annual salary from my insurance days, larger than I'd ever imagined my little business could be worth. "There's something else," Julie continued. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about your expansion possibilities. I know someone who might be interested in discussing a partnership rather than an outright sale." She handed me a business card. "Victoria Chang. She runs a consulting firm that helps small businesses scale nationally. She's particularly interested in businesses owned by women over 50. I turned the card over in my hands, feeling its substantial weight. "What kind of partnership?" "That would be for you to discuss with her. But think about it. Your methodology, her infrastructure, and marketing capabilities. You could reach thousands of clients instead of dozens." I drove home in a daze, the valuation report on my passenger seat like a ticking bomb. For 40 years, I'd defined myself by other people's needs. Robert's wife, Finley's mother, the children's caregiver, the client's helper. I'd never considered that I might have built something valuable entirely on my own. That evening, Finley called. "Have you thought about the Hampton house?" he asked without preamble. I looked at the valuation report spread across my kitchen table, at the business card Julie had given me, at the client schedule that extended 3 months into the future. "I have," I said. "And? I'm not interested in providing funding." A pause. "Mom, we talked about this. It's an investment for the whole family." "Which family?" I asked quietly. "The one that shows up for birthdays to ask for money? Or the one that calls to ask how I'm doing?" "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm reevaluating my priorities." "Look," Finley said, his voice taking on that edge it got when he wasn't getting his way. "I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this isn't like you. You've always been supportive of our goals. Always been supportive. As if support was a one-way street, flowing endlessly from parent to child without reciprocation or respect. I've been supportive of goals that made sense," I said. "This doesn't." "Fine," he said curtly. "But don't come crying to us when you need help down the road. We're trying to secure our future and yours. If you want to be stubborn about it, that's your choice." The line went dead. I sat holding the phone, feeling something like relief wash over me. For the first time in years, I'd said no to Finley. Not maybe, not we'll see, not let me think about it. No. It felt like taking my first full breath in months. The next morning, I called Victoria Chang. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, her voice warm but professional. "Julie told me about your business. I'd love to discuss some possibilities with you." "What kind of possibilities?" "The kind that turn local success stories into national movements." "When can we meet?" I looked at my calendar, at the neat rows of client appointments that represented my cute hobby, my little business, my fantasy. "How about Thursday at 2? "Perfect. And Mrs. Patterson, bring your biggest dreams. At 70, you're just getting started." After I hung up, I walked to my bathroom mirror and studied my reflection. Same gray hair, same lines around my eyes, same 70-year-old face that Jessica thought should be contemplating death. But something in my expression had changed. Something had hardened and clarified, like metal tempered in fire. I thought about Finley's laughter, about Jessica's cruel words, about the years I'd spent making myself smaller to make them comfortable. No more. The phone rang. Mrs. Miller, needing to reschedule our session for next week. As I updated my calendar, I realized that for the first time in months, I was looking forward to tomorrow. Victoria Chang's office occupied the top floor of a sleek building in the financial district, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city. I'd expected intimidation, but instead felt a strange sense of homecoming as I was escorted through halls lined with photographs of successful women entrepreneurs. Faces that looked like mine, weathered by experience but bright with determination. "Eleanor," Victoria said, rising from behind a glass desk that seemed to float in the light-filled space. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45, with the kind of confident energy that comes from building something significant from nothing. "Julie's told me wonderful things about your business." We spent the first hour reviewing my operations in detail. Victoria asked questions that no one had ever asked, about my client demographics, my competitive advantages, my vision for growth. She listened with the intensity of someone who saw potential, where others saw limitations. "Your methodology is gold," she said finally, leaning back in her chair. "The way you combine psychological insight with practical organization, that's not just a service, it's a framework, a philosophy. I never thought of it that way." "That's because you're too close to it. But look at this client feedback." She gestured to the testimonials I'd brought. "These aren't reviews of a cleaning service. These are transformation stories. People talking about how you helped them rebuild their lives after trauma, divorce, loss. That's not organizing. That's healing." The word hung between us. Healing. It felt presumptuous to claim, yet accurate in ways I'd never articulated. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. Victoria pulled out a thick presentation folder. "A partnership. You retain majority ownership and creative control. My firm handles infrastructure, marketing, technology, and scaling. We develop your methodology into a certification program, create online courses, publish your materials as books and workbooks. She opened the folder, revealing page after page of market analysis, revenue projections, and implementation timelines. Within 5 years, we could have Harmony Home Solutions operating in 20 major cities with trained practitioners using your methods. The numbers were staggering. Not just the projected revenue, but the reach. Thousands of people who could benefit from the approach I'd developed through years of trial and error in small suburban homes. "There's something else," Victoria said, her voice taking on a more personal tone. "My mother is 73. She started a catering business at 68 after my father died. Last year, she sold it for enough money to buy a house in Tuscany and fund college educations for all 6 grandchildren. Age isn't a ceiling, Eleanor. It's a foundation." I thought about Jessica's words, death, not dreams, and felt a familiar fire kindle in my chest. "When would we start?" I asked. "Tomorrow, if you're ready." "But Eleanor," Victoria leaned forward, her expression serious. "This will change everything. Your life, your schedule, your relationships. Some people won't understand. Some people won't like it." I thought about Finley's dismissive laughter, about years of being treated like a quaint old lady playing at business. "Good," I said. The contract negotiations took 2 weeks. Victoria's lawyers were thorough but fair, ensuring I retained 60% ownership and final approval on all major decisions. The advance payment alone was more money than I'd made in my best year. I didn't tell Finley and Jessica. Not yet. Instead, I focused on the work. Victoria's team was a revelation. Young, sharp professionals who treated my ideas with the respect I'd forgotten I deserved. The marketing director, a woman named Kate who couldn't have been older than 30, spoke about my methodology as if it were groundbreaking research. "The tagline writes itself," she said during our first strategy meeting. "Harmony Home Solutions, where life organization meets life transformation." This isn't about decluttering. It's about reclaiming agency. Agency. Another word I'd never applied to my work, but that felt precisely right. We scheduled the first round of practitioner training for 6 weeks out. Victoria's team had identified 12 cities for initial expansion, with candidates already applying for certification programs. The online platform was in development, the book proposal was being refined by a literary agent, and a major lifestyle magazine had expressed interest in featuring our story. Our story. For the first time in years, I was part of something bigger than myself. It was during the 3rd week of this whirlwind that David called. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying the kind of excitement I remembered from his childhood. "I just saw the article." "What article?" "In Entrepreneur magazine, about women over 50 starting successful businesses. They mentioned you and Harmony Home Solutions. Mom, it says you're partnering with Victoria Chang's firm to go national." My stomach dropped. I'd known the publicity would start eventually, but I'd hoped to control the timing. "David, I can explain." "Explain what? That you're brilliant? That you've built something amazing?" "Mom, I'm so proud I can barely stand it." His genuine delight was so different from what I'd come to expect from family that it nearly brought me to tears. "You're not angry that I didn't tell you sooner?" "Why would I be angry? You're a grown woman making smart business decisions." "Though I have to ask, does Finley know?" Before I could answer, my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Finley's car in my driveway, Jessica in the passenger seat, both of them wearing expressions of barely contained fury. "I have to go," I told David. "Finley is here." "Good luck, Mom. Remember, you don't owe anyone an explanation for your success." I opened the door to find my son holding a printout of the magazine article, his face flushed with what looked like embarrassment and rage. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, pushing past me into my living room. Jessica followed, her heels clicking against my hardwood floors like gunshots. "Eleanor, we need to talk." "About what?" "About this," Finley said, waving the article. "About you making major business decisions without consulting your family." Family. As if the people who'd spent my birthday telling me my dreams were delusions had any claim to my business decisions. "It's my business," I said calmly. "But, Mom," Finley's voice took on a wheedling tone I recognized from his teenage years. This affects all of us. If you're making this kind of money, if there are these opportunities, we should be part of the conversation. Why? The simple question seemed to catch him off guard. Because we're family. Because we care about you. Is that why you laughed when Jessica told me I should be thinking about death instead of dreams? Jessica stepped forward, her face arranging itself into an expression of wounded innocence. Eleanor, you're taking that completely out of context. I was trying to help you be realistic. Realistic, I repeated. About my little hobby business that apparently has enough value to attract national investors. Look, Finley said, clearly struggling to recalibrate. We may have been overly concerned about the risks, but this changes things. If there's real money involved, we should be involved too. Why? Because... He stopped, seeming to realize that the truth, because they wanted access to my newfound worth, wouldn't sound as noble as he'd hoped. Because you've always shared your successes with family, Jessica finished smoothly. This could benefit everyone. I looked at them standing in my living room. My son who'd laughed at his wife's cruelty. My daughter-in-law who'd tried to convince me my life was effectively over. They'd come here not to apologize, not to celebrate my success, but to stake their claim on it. You're right, I said. This does change things. Hope flickered in Finley's eyes. It changes the fact that I now know what I'm worth, I continued, and what my time is worth, and what my respect is worth. Mom, I'm not finished. The words came out harder than I'd intended, but I didn't soften them. For years, I've watched you treat me like a convenience store. Need money? Ask Mom? Need a favor? Call Eleanor? Need someone to blame for not getting what you want? Mother's an easy target. That's not fair, Jessica protested. Isn't it? When was the last time either of you asked about my work without immediately suggesting I should quit? When was the last time you visited without needing something? The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Outside, traffic hummed past my windows, the normal sounds of a normal Tuesday afternoon. But nothing in this room felt normal anymore. We love you, Finley said finally. I'm sure you do, I replied. In your way. But love without respect isn't enough anymore. So what are you saying? Jessica's voice had gone sharp again, the pretense of concern falling away. I'm saying that my business partnerships are my decision. My money is my responsibility. My future is my choice. And the Hampton house? Find another way to finance it. Finley's face went through several expressions before settling on something ugly and familiar. The look he'd worn as a teenager when he didn't get his way. Fine. But don't expect us to be there when this partnership falls apart and you lose everything. I won't, I said simply. They left without another word, Jessica's heels sharp against my front porch, Finley's car door slamming with unnecessary force. I watched them drive away, then walked to my office and called Victoria. The expansion timeline, I said when she answered. Let's accelerate it. Eleanor, what's happened? I just realized I've been thinking too small. 3 days later, I signed the partnership agreement. Victoria's team moved with impressive efficiency. Within a week, applications for the first practitioner training program had exceeded capacity. The business plan we'd developed projected national presence within 18 months, with potential international expansion to follow. I was having lunch with Mrs. Rodriguez celebrating her successful kitchen reorganization, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Is this Eleanor Patterson from Harmony Home Solutions? I saw the feature in Better Homes and Gardens. I'm a single mother in Phoenix, desperate for help. Do you have any practitioners in Arizona yet? Everything all right, dear? Mrs. Rodriguez asked, noticing my expression. I showed her the message. Someone in Arizona needs help. And you can help her now, can't you? With this expansion thing, I stared at the phone, at this stranger reaching out across 2,000 miles, because something I'd created had given her hope. Yes, I said, understanding hitting me like a physical force. I can help her. I texted back. Not yet, but we will within 3 months. Can you wait? The response came immediately. I'll wait as long as it takes. Thank you for giving me something to look forward to. That night, I sat in my office updating the client database that would soon become a national network. Tomorrow, I had a conference call with the literary agent about my book proposal. Next week, filming would begin for the online course series. In a month, I'd be flying to New York for meetings with potential corporate clients. At 70, I was busier than I'd been in decades. Busier, happier, and more purposeful than I'd felt since Robert died. My phone rang. Sarah, calling from Seattle. Mom, David sent me the article about your partnership. This is incredible. We're so proud of you. Thank you, sweetheart. And Mom? About Finley and Jessica. David told me they're upset about being left out of your business decisions. I considered my response carefully. They made their position clear on my birthday. Good for you for not including them, Sarah said firmly. You don't owe anyone access to your success, especially people who tried to talk you out of pursuing it. After we hung up, I pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Not business plans or client notes, but something more personal. A will. It was time to ensure that my legacy, whatever it became, went to the people who'd supported my dreams rather than those who'd tried to bury them. Outside my window, autumn was settling over the neighborhood. 70 years old, and I was just beginning to bloom. The first Harmony Home Solutions training seminar took place in a conference center in Chicago, with 32 practitioners from across the Midwest. I stood at the front of the room, looking out at faces that ranged from mid-20s to late 60s, people who'd left their existing careers to learn my methodology. Transformation begins with understanding, I said, clicking to the first slide of my presentation. We're not moving objects. We're moving obstacles to the life our clients want to live. 6 months ago, I'd been defending my little business to my daughter-in-law. Now I was teaching a room full of professionals who'd paid $3,000 each to learn my methods. The irony wasn't lost on me. After the morning session, a woman named Patricia approached me during break. She was probably 60, with silver hair and tired eyes that reminded me of my own reflection from a year ago. Mrs. Patterson, she said, I wanted to thank you. Not just for the training, but for the hope. The hope? My daughter told me I was too old to start over after my divorce. Said I should just find a nice retirement community and accept that my productive years were behind me. She smiled and suddenly looked 10 years younger. Yesterday, I signed my first client. A woman going through exactly what I went through. I get to help her see that 60 isn't the end. It's a new beginning. I watched her walk away, thinking about the ripple effect of what we were creating. Not just a business, but a movement of women refusing to be discarded, dismissed, or diminished by other people's limited expectations. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Finley. Saw the article in Forbes. Need to talk. I deleted it without responding. The Forbes piece had been unexpected. A profile of women entrepreneurs over 50, featuring my partnership with Victoria as a case study in late-life business success. The journalist had been particularly interested in my origin story, the narrative of starting over at 63 after my husband's death. She hadn't included the part about my family's reaction to my business. I'd kept that private, though she'd clearly sensed there was more to the story. You have the look of someone who's been underestimated, she'd said during our interview. What drives a 70-year-old woman to pursue national expansion instead of retirement? I'd thought about Jessica's cruel words, about Finley's laughter, about years of being treated like a burden instead of a resource. The desire to prove that potential doesn't have an expiration date, I'd finally answered. Now, reading the published article on the plane back from Chicago, I realized how far I'd come from the woman who'd sat in her dining room 6 months ago, feeling invisible at her own birthday party. The pilot announced our descent into the home airport. I looked down at the city where I'd spent most of my adult life, where I'd raised children and buried a husband and built a business that was now expanding beyond anything I'd imagined possible. My phone rang as I collected my luggage. Sarah, calling from Seattle. Mom, I just read the Forbes article. David and I are beside ourselves with pride. You're going to be in 20 cities? If everything goes according to plan. And the book deal? Mom, you're going to be a published author. The book contract had been finalized the week before. A memoir and methodology guide that the publisher believed could reach bestseller lists. At 70, I was becoming an author. Another dream Jessica would have called a fantasy. There's something else, I said, settling into my car in the airport parking garage. Something I need to tell you and David. What's wrong? You sound serious. Nothing's wrong, but I'm making some changes, legal changes, about inheritance. A pause. Mom, you don't need to discuss that with us. That's your decision. I want to discuss it. You and David are inheriting everything. The business, the house, the investments, all of it. What about Finley? I started the engine, considering my words carefully. Finley made his position on my business very clear. I'm simply honoring his wishes by not burdening him with the proceeds. Mom, Sarah's voice was careful. Are you sure about this? I mean, we're grateful, but he's your biological son. And you're my chosen daughter. You've supported my dreams instead of mocking them. You've celebrated my successes instead of trying to exploit them. Biology doesn't create character, Sarah. Choices do. After we hung up, I drove home through neighborhoods where my business had first taken root. Past Mrs. Rodriguez's house, where I'd learned that grief could be organized and processed like any other overwhelming force. Past the community center, where I'd given my first public presentation about life transitions. Past the coffee shop where I'd written my initial business plan on napkins. My house looked smaller when I pulled into the driveway, but not in a diminishing way. It looked like a launching pad rather than a final destination. Inside, my answering machine blinked with messages. 3 from potential clients who'd seen the Forbes article. 1 from a television producer interested in developing a lifestyle show. And 1 from Finley, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Mom, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. Call me back. I erased the message without writing down the number. That weekend, I flew to Los Angeles for meetings with media executives. Victoria accompanied me, along with Kate from marketing and a publicist named Amanda who specialized in what she called late bloomer success stories. The demographic is hungry for this narrative, Amanda explained as we sat in a restaurant overlooking the Pacific. Women over 50 control 70% of American wealth, but they're constantly told their best years are behind them. Your story challenges that assumption directly. It's not just about money, I said, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. It's about refusing to be invisible. Exactly, Victoria said. That's why this resonates. You're not just building a business, you're modeling a different way to age. The meetings went better than anyone had expected. By Sunday, we had preliminary agreements for a lifestyle show, a monthly magazine column, and a speaking engagement at a major women's conference in New York. I returned home to find an envelope slipped under my front door. Inside, a handwritten note from Jessica. Eleanor, I think there's been a misunderstanding. When I spoke at your birthday, I was only trying to protect you from disappointment. I never meant to suggest your business wasn't valuable. Perhaps we could have lunch and discuss how Finley and I might contribute to your expansion efforts. We have contacts in marketing and business development that could be useful. Love, Jessica. I read the note twice, marveling at the revisionist history it represented. The suggestion that her cruelty had been protection, that my success was something they'd always believed in, that their sudden interest was motivated by love rather than greed. I walked to my kitchen and fed the note to my garbage disposal, watching the blades reduce it to pulp. Monday brought the first day of our second practitioner training, this one in Dallas. As I reviewed my presentation materials, my landline rang, a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Patterson, this is Joan Walsh from the Seattle Times. I'm working on a feature about family dynamics and late life success. I understand you've recently experienced some tension with family members regarding your business expansion. My blood chilled. I'm sorry, who gave you this information? I can't reveal my sources, but I'd love to get your perspective on how families should handle situations where older members make significant life changes that affect inheritance expectations. I hung up without another word, my hands shaking. Someone had talked to a reporter. Someone had shared private family information, trying to create a narrative that would embarrass me or damage my business. I called Victoria immediately. They're trying to sabotage this, I said, explaining about the reporter's call. Eleanor, take a breath. This isn't sabotage. It's desperation. And it's actually good news. Good news? They wouldn't be trying to create negative publicity if they weren't genuinely worried about losing access to your money. This means they're taking your success seriously for the first time. That evening, as I prepared for my flight to Dallas, I drafted an email to my lawyer. It was time to make the will changes official. Not in anger, but with the clarity that comes from understanding exactly who had earned their place in my legacy. David and Sarah had loved me when I had nothing to offer but motherhood. They'd supported my dreams when those dreams seemed impossible. They'd celebrated my successes without trying to claim ownership of them. Finley and Jessica had tolerated me when I was useful and dismissed me when I wasn't. They'd mocked my aspirations, and then tried to claim them when those aspirations proved profitable. The choice was simple. I printed the boarding pass for my morning flight, then walked to my office and opened the safe where I kept important documents. Inside, along with my insurance papers and investment records, was a small wooden box I hadn't opened in months. It contained letters, dozens of them, from clients whose lives had been changed by our work together. Thank you notes, updates on life improvements, pictures of organized spaces that had become organized lives. Dear Eleanor, read one from a woman named Beth. 6 months ago, I was drowning in my own home, drowning in grief, in clutter, in the feeling that I'd lost control of everything that mattered. You didn't just help me organize my closets, you helped me organize my future. For the first time since my husband died, I feel capable. I feel hopeful. I feel like myself again. I closed the box and returned it to the safe, thinking about the hundreds of women I'd helped find their footing after loss, divorce, or transition. Women who'd been told they were too old, too emotional, too set in their ways to change. Women who'd proved everyone wrong. In the morning, I would fly to Dallas and teach 32 more practitioners how to do the same work. In 3 weeks, I would speak at the Women's Conference in New York to an audience of 5,000. In 6 months, the book would be published, carrying my methodology to readers I'd never meet, but whose lives might still be transformed by what I'd learned. At 70, I wasn't winding down. I was scaling up. My phone rang one final time. David, calling from Montana. Mom, Sarah told me about the will changes. I want you to know. We don't need your money. We just need you to be happy. I am happy, I said, and realized it was completely true. Good, because you deserve to be. And Mom, whatever happens with Finley, remember that you raised 2 kids who think you're extraordinary. 3, if you count him, but he seems to have forgotten how to show it. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house, surrounded by the life I'd built and rebuilt and built again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that age was just a number, and dreams had no expiration date. But tonight, I was simply a 70-year-old woman who'd remembered her own worth. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. 2 years later, I stood on the stage at Lincoln Center, looking out at an audience of 3,000 women who'd paid to hear me speak at the International Women's Leadership Summit. The spotlights made it impossible to see individual faces, but I could feel their energy, anticipation, hope, the electricity of people ready to believe in their own potential. When I was 70, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. Someone told me I should be thinking about death, not dreams. A murmur rippled through the audience. In the front row, I could see Victoria and her team, David and Sarah, who'd flown in from their respective coasts, and Amanda, who'd become not just my publicist, but one of my closest friends. Today, at 72, I stand before you as the founder of a company operating in 47 cities across North America. My book has spent 16 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. My online courses have reached over 100,000 students worldwide. The applause was thunderous, but I wasn't finished. I tell you this not to boast, but to challenge every assumption you've ever accepted about what's possible after 50, 60, 70. The woman who tried to convince me my dreams were over was 38 years old. She confused her own limitations with universal truth. More applause, mixed with laughter. I'd learned to work an audience over the past 2 years, traveling to conferences across the country, sharing stages with business leaders and motivational speakers who treated me as an equal, not a curiosity. The real tragedy isn't aging, I continued. It's accepting other people's definitions of what aging means. After my speech, I was surrounded by women wanting to share their stories. 60-year-olds starting new businesses, 55-year-olds going back to school, 70-year-olds learning to paint or write or travel solo for the first time. Each conversation reminded me why this work mattered beyond the financial success. Mrs. Patterson, a woman with steel-gray hair, approached during the reception. I'm Linda Turner from Portland. I used your methodology after my husband's death. Not just for organizing his belongings, but for organizing my entire life. Last month, I opened my own art studio. How wonderful. What kind of art? Pottery. Something I always wanted to try but never had time for. My children thought I was having a breakdown. They're still not speaking to me. I recognized the pain in her eyes. The familiar ache of family members who'd rather see you diminished than changed. Their discomfort with your growth says nothing about the validity of your dreams. That's exactly what I needed to hear, she said, tears starting. Thank you for showing us it's never too late to become who we're meant to be. Later that evening, in my hotel suite overlooking Central Park, I reviewed the quarterly reports Victoria had sent. Harmony Home Solutions was now generating $12 million in annual revenue, with expansion planned into Canada and the United Kingdom. The book rights had been sold internationally, and a documentary crew was following my story for a film about late-life entrepreneurship. $12 million. I thought about the Hampton house Finley and Jessica had wanted me to finance. The $8,000 a month that had seemed so unreasonable to them when they thought I was just a lonely old woman with a cute hobby. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Mrs. Patterson, this is Dr. Bill Harrison from Harvard Business School. We'd like to invite you to speak to our MBA students about unconventional entrepreneurship. Could we schedule a call? Harvard Business School. I laughed out loud in my empty hotel room, remembering Jessica's dismissive words about my education, my age, my relevance. The next morning, I flew back home to find my driveway occupied by Finley's car and a second vehicle I didn't recognize. Through my front window, I could see figures moving around my living room. I parked on the street and walked slowly to my front door, keys ready but unnecessary. They'd let themselves in using the spare key I'd forgotten Finley still had. Mom, he called from my kitchen as I entered. Perfect timing. We brought someone to meet you. In my living room sat Finley, Jessica, and a man in an expensive suit who rose when I appeared. He was perhaps 55, with the kind of confidence that comes from making money off other people's assets. Mrs. Patterson, the stranger said, extending his hand. Robert Lawson from Lawson Financial Management. Your son has told me so much about your recent business success. I didn't take his hand. And you are here because? Well, Finley jumped in, his voice carrying that forced enthusiasm I remembered from childhood when he was trying to talk his way out of trouble. Rob specializes in wealth management for sudden windfall situations. We thought you might benefit from professional guidance. Professional guidance. As if my success had been accidental, a lottery win that required adult supervision to manage properly. I already have financial advisors, I said calmly. But Mom, Jessica said, her voice honey-sweet, Robert works specifically with families. He understands the importance of preserving wealth across generations. Across generations. The assumption that my money was their inheritance, just waiting for proper distribution. I walked to my kitchen and put on the kettle, a deliberate delay that forced them to follow me. Mr. Lawson looked around my modest kitchen with barely concealed disappointment. Clearly, he'd expected more obvious signs of wealth. Mrs. Patterson, he said, your son mentioned that you might be interested in setting up trust funds for the family. Tax advantages, estate planning, ensuring your legacy benefits everyone appropriately. My legacy is already planned, I said. But surely, Jessica said, with this kind of money, you want to make sure it's handled responsibly. Finley and I have been researching investment strategies. Have you? Of course. We want to help. We want to be involved. I poured myself tea, not offering any to my uninvited guests. Where was this financial interest when I was asking for basic emotional support? Mom, that's not fair, Finley protested. We've always supported you. No, I said, setting down my cup with deliberate precision. You've always tolerated me. There's a difference. Mr. Lawson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps I should leave you to discuss this privately. That won't be necessary, I said, because there's nothing to discuss. Mr. Lawson, I won't be requiring your services. But, Mrs. Patterson, with respect, wealth of this magnitude requires professional oversight. I have professional oversight. From advisors I chose myself, who understand my values and my goals. Jessica's mask was slipping again, revealing the sharp edges underneath. Eleanor, you're being unreasonable. We're family. We should be part of these decisions. Family, I repeated. Let me ask you something, Jessica. What did you give me for my 70th birthday? She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. We gave you gift cards. Generic gift cards from the drugstore. $25 each. I turned to Finley. And what did you give me? Mom, where is this going? Answer the question. I don't remember exactly. Nothing, I said. You gave me nothing. Not a card, not a gift, not even the courtesy of pretending to care about what I might want. That's not... But you remember exactly how much my house is worth. You remember exactly how much I helped you with your down payment. You remember every dollar you think you're entitled to. Mr. Lawson was edging toward the door, clearly recognizing that he'd stumbled into a family confrontation he wanted no part of. Mom, you're being dramatic, Finley said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Or am I being accurate? I walked to my office and returned with a folder. Copies of my updated will, bank statements showing the business accounts they'd never known existed, and the contract with Victoria's firm that outlined my majority ownership and control. Since you're so interested in my financial planning, I said, placing the documents on the kitchen table, here's my complete financial picture. They read in silence, Jessica's face growing paler with each page. This can't be right, she whispered finally. This says the business is worth $18 million as of last month's valuation. $18 million? Finley's voice cracked slightly. Mom, why didn't you tell us? Tell you what? That my cute hobby was actually valuable? That my little business had potential? I tried to tell you. You laughed. We didn't laugh at your business. You laughed at me, I said, my voice cutting through his attempted explanation. On my birthday. In my house. You laughed at your wife's cruelty and called it truth. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the refrigerator seemed to stop humming. The will, Jessica said finally, staring at the document. It says everything goes to David and Sarah. Yes, but Finley is your biological son, and David and Sarah are my chosen children. They've earned their inheritance through love, support, and respect. Currency you seem to have forgotten the value of. Finley stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. You can't disinherit your own son over one conversation. I'm not disinheriting you over one conversation, I said. I'm disinheriting you because of 30 years of conversations. Because you've treated me like an obligation instead of a person. Because you've confused duty with love and entitlement with family. Mom, please. His voice broke slightly. We can fix this. We can change. For a moment, I almost wavered. This was my son, after all. The boy I'd nursed through pneumonia at age 6, whose graduation I'd attended with tears of pride, whose first apartment I'd helped him furnish. But then I remembered his laughter, the sound of my own child finding amusement in my humiliation. Change requires acknowledging what needs changing, I said. You've never apologized for that night. You've never admitted that your wife's words were cruel. You've never acknowledged that your laughter was a betrayal. I'm acknowledging it now. Because there's $18 million at stake, not because you recognize that you hurt me. Jessica stood as well, her composure finally cracking entirely. This is insane. You're punishing us for being honest about your limitations. I'm rewarding myself for recognizing my worth, I corrected. There's a difference. They left without another word, Mr. Sow, Lawson trailing behind them like debris from a storm. Through my front window, I watched them argue in my driveway. Sharp gestures, raised voices, the kind of heated disagreement that happens when people realize they've badly miscalculated. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt clean, like I'd finally removed a splinter that had been festering for years. That night, David called. Sarah told me about the will. Mom, are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything. It's just, he's going to be devastated. Despite everything, he loves you. I know he does, I said. But love without respect isn't enough anymore. And David, I need you to understand something. This isn't about the money. This is about refusing to reward people who tried to make me feel ashamed of my own success. I understand, he said quietly. I just hope someday he understands too. Maybe he will. But that's his work to do, not mine. 6 months later, I received an invitation that made me laugh until tears came. Finley and Jessica were hosting a housewarming party for their new home. Not the Hampton house they'd wanted me to finance, but a modest colonial in a middle-class neighborhood. The invitation was addressed to Eleanor Patterson, founder and CEO, Harmony Home Solutions. I didn't attend, but I did send a gift. A beautiful leather-bound copy of my book, inscribed, "To Finley and Jessica. May you find harmony in the life you've chosen. Best wishes, Eleanor." It was signed with my full name and business title, a reminder that the woman they'd tried to diminish had become someone they now felt compelled to acknowledge. The book had been dedicated to David and Sarah, who taught me that family is built through choice, loyalty, and love. It had also included a chapter about recognizing when relationships had become toxic and the courage required to prioritize your own dignity over other people's comfort. At 72, I was booked solid with speaking engagements through the following year. The business continued expanding internationally. The documentary about my story had premiered at Sundance and been picked up by a major streaming service. I'd proven that 70 wasn't too old for dreams. That success could come at any age. That respect was earned, not inherited. And sometimes, late at night in my quiet house, I thought about Finley's laughter and felt nothing but gratitude, because it had set me free. That night, unable to sleep, I found myself reliving my 70th birthday, the moment everything began to shift. The candles on my 70th birthday cake flickered like dying stars, their wax beginning to drip onto the store-bought frosting. I watched them from across my own dining room table, feeling like a stranger in my own home. The voices around me blurred into background noise. My son Finley's booming laugh, his wife Jessica's sharp commentary, the rustle of wrapping paper being carelessly discarded on my hardwood floors. I adjusted the collar of my orange dress, the one I'd worn to every important occasion for the past 5 years, because it made me feel dignified, professional. The fabric felt thinner now, like everything else in my life. Even my reflection in the hallway mirror seemed translucent, as if I were slowly disappearing. "Mom, you're not even listening," Finley said, his voice carrying that edge of impatience I'd grown accustomed to over the years. At 42, he'd inherited his father's broad shoulders and commanding presence, but none of his father's gentleness. "Jessica was telling you about the vacation house." I forced a smile, the kind I'd perfected after decades of smoothing over uncomfortable moments. "I'm sorry, dear. My mind was elsewhere." Jessica leaned forward, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the table. She was 38, beautiful in that calculated way that required constant maintenance, weekly salon appointments, monthly procedures, a wardrobe that cost more than some people's annual salaries. We found this amazing place in the Hamptons. 6 bedrooms, pool, ocean view, perfect for family gatherings. "That sounds lovely," I murmured, though something in her tone made my stomach tighten. There was always something in Jessica's tone, a subtle condescension that had been growing stronger over the 8 years since she'd married my son. "The thing is," Finley continued, cutting into his slice of cake with unnecessary force, "it's a bit of a stretch financially, even with both our salaries." I felt the familiar weight of expectations settling on my shoulders. This was how it always began. The casual mention of something they wanted, followed by the gradual revelation that they expected me to provide it. Over the years, I'd helped with their down payment, Jessica's car, Finley's business venture that had failed within 6 months. Each time I told myself it was what mothers did, what family meant. The monthly payments would be about $8,000, Jessica said, her voice light as if discussing the weather. But think of it as an investment. Property values in that area only go up. $8,000. I thought about my own small business, Harmony Home Solutions, the organizing and life coaching service I'd built from nothing after my husband died 7 years ago. Some months I barely cleared $6,000 after expenses. Most months, I didn't clear that much. That's a significant amount, I said carefully. But you've got that business of yours, Finley said, waving his fork dismissively. And the house is paid off. You could always take out a home equity loan. My house. The 3-bedroom colonial that Robert and I had bought 35 years ago, where I'd raised Finley, where I'd nursed my husband through his final illness, where I'd rebuilt my life one small client at a time. The idea of putting it at risk made my chest tighten. I'm not sure that's wise at my age, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Jessica's laugh was like glass breaking. At your age? Eleanor, you talk like you're 90. 70 is nothing these days. Look at Warren Buffett. He's still making billion-dollar deals in his 90s. Jessica's right, Finley said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. The gesture should have been comforting, but his grip was too tight, too insistent. You're being overly cautious. Besides, this would be a family investment, somewhere for all of us to enjoy. All of us. I wondered if that included my 2 adopted children, David and Sarah, who lived across the country but visited when they could, who remembered my birthday without prompting, who asked about my business with genuine interest, who never made me feel like a burden or an ATM. They weren't here today. David was managing a conservation project in Montana, and Sarah was finishing her medical residency in Seattle. I'd told them not to worry about flying out, that we'd celebrate when they visited next month. Now I wished I'd insisted they come. I'll need to think about it, I said finally. Jessica's smile tightened at the corners. Of course, though the seller won't wait forever. Properties like this move fast. The conversation drifted to other topics. Finley's promotion at the marketing firm, Jessica's yoga instructor certification, their plans for renovating their current kitchen. I found myself studying their faces, looking for traces of the man I'd raised, the woman who'd once seemed genuinely grateful to be part of our family. When had Finley become so entitled? When had Jessica's requests become demands? When had I become the family's designated source of funding rather than its matriarch? The cake sat half-eaten on my grandmother's china plates, the ones Jessica had once admired with covetous eyes. Everything in this house carried memory. The Persian rug Robert and I had saved for months to buy, the built-in bookshelves he'd installed himself, the kitchen table where I'd helped Finley with homework and nursed him through childhood fevers. Actually, Jessica said, setting down her fork with a decisive click, there's something we wanted to discuss with you. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Finley shifted in his seat, suddenly avoiding my eyes. Oh, it's about your business, Jessica continued, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she thought she was being helpful. Finley and I have been talking, and we're concerned. Concerned. The word made my skin prickle. About what, exactly? Mom, Finley said, finally looking at me. You're 70 years old. Don't you think it's time to slow down? Focus on enjoying retirement? I enjoy my work, I said simply. My clients depend on me. Jessica leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting to something that looked like pity. But Eleanor, let's be realistic. How much growth can there really be in a little organizing business? You're competing with companies that have marketing budgets, professional websites, teams of employees. Little organizing business. The word stung more than I expected. For 7 years, I'd poured everything into Harmony Home Solutions. I'd started with one client, an overwhelmed mother of 3 who'd heard about me through our church. Word of mouth had grown my client base to 30 regular customers across 3 counties. I'd developed my own methodology, created workbooks, even begun writing what I hoped would become a book about organizing not just homes, but lives. It's not just organizing, I said, hearing the defensive note in my voice and hating it. It's life coaching, helping people create systems that work for their specific needs. That's sweet, Mom, Finley said, the way you'd talk to a child playing dress-up. But at some point you have to be practical. What happens if you get sick? What if you fall? What if your mind starts to go? What if your mind starts to go? The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Robert had died of early-onset Alzheimer's at 68. Finley knew exactly how those words would land. My mind is perfectly sharp, I said quietly. For now, Jessica added. But honestly, Eleanor, watching you struggle with that little business is painful. You should be enjoying your golden years, not stressing about client schedules and invoices. Struggle. As if the business I'd built from nothing, the purpose I'd found in helping others transform their lives, was merely a source of embarrassment for them. Maybe it's time to consider selling, Finley said. Not that there's much to sell, but you could probably get something for your client list. Then you could help us with the house, and we could all benefit. There it was. The real agenda, wrapped in concern for my well-being. They wanted me to dissolve the work that gave my life meaning so I could bankroll their lifestyle upgrade. I'm not interested in selling, I said. Jessica's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold underneath. Eleanor, you have to understand. We're thinking about your future. About our future as a family. Finley and I won't be young forever. We need to plan for when we're taking care of you. Taking care of me. As if it were a foregone conclusion that I'd become their burden, their obligation. As if I had no agency in my own life's trajectory. The dining room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. The birthday cake sat between us like evidence of a celebration that had never really been about celebrating me at all. You know what your problem is? Jessica continued, emboldened by my silence. You're living in a fantasy. This whole entrepreneur thing. It's cute for a hobby, but it's not reality. Not at your age. The words hit like physical blows. Cute. Hobby. Not reality. I have clients who have transformed their lives through my work, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Because they feel sorry for you, Jessica replied with brutal directness. Because you're a sweet old lady, and they don't want to hurt your feelings by firing you. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway marking time, each tick like a heartbeat in the suddenly airless room. Finley said nothing. He sat there, fork suspended halfway to his mouth, and said absolutely nothing while his wife eviscerated everything I'd built. You're 70 years old, Eleanor, Jessica said, standing to clear her plate. At your age, you should be thinking about death, not dreams. The words landed like a physical blow. Death, not dreams. As if reaching 70 meant my life was over, my purpose fulfilled, my remaining years nothing but a countdown to the grave. And then Finley laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable chuckle. A genuine laugh of agreement, as if his wife had just delivered the punchline to a joke they'd been sharing at my expense. Jesus, Jess, he said, still chuckling. Brutal but true. I stared at my son, the boy I'd rocked through nightmares, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd paid by working double shifts at the insurance office, the man I'd supported through his divorce from his first wife, his failed business ventures, his periods of unemployment. He was laughing at his wife's cruelty. On my birthday, in my own home, something inside me shifted. Not broke, shifted. Like tectonic plates rearranging themselves deep beneath the Earth's surface, invisible but fundamental. I see, I said quietly. Jessica returned to the table with a satisfied expression, as if she'd just completed an unpleasant but necessary task. We're not trying to be mean, Eleanor. We love you. We just want you to be realistic about this phase of your life. This phase of my life. As if I were in the final act of a play, with nothing left but to deliver my closing monologue and exit stage left. I stood slowly, my legs steadier than I'd expected. Thank you for coming to celebrate my birthday. Are you kicking us out? Finley asked, finally showing a flicker of uncertainty. I'm tired, I said, which was true. Tired in ways that had nothing to do with my age and everything to do with the weight of disappointing people who had already decided I was a disappointment. They gathered their things with the efficient movements of people who'd gotten what they came for, the satisfaction of putting me in my place, of establishing the hierarchy they preferred. Jessica kissed my cheek with lips that felt cold as marble. Finley squeezed my shoulder with the same proprietary grip he'd used on my hand. Think about what we said, Mom, he said. About the house, about slowing down. We just want what's best for you. After they left, I sat in my dining room surrounded by the detritus of my birthday celebration. Crumpled napkins, cake crumbs, a small pile of generic gift cards they'd presented without ceremony. The candles had burned down to stubs, their flames finally guttering out in pools of wax. I picked up my phone and scrolled to David's number, then put it down again. What would I say? That my biological son thinks my life's work is a joke? That his wife believes I should be contemplating my mortality instead of pursuing my dreams? Instead, I walked to my home office, the converted spare bedroom where I ran Harmony Home Solutions. The walls were covered with thank you notes from clients, before and after photos of transformed spaces, certificates from continuing education courses I'd taken to improve my skills. My business plan sat on the desk, 60 pages of market research, financial projections, and growth strategies I'd developed with the help of a mentor from the Small Business Administration. Cute hobby, little business, fantasy. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen, cursor blinking in the search bar. For a moment, I almost closed it. Almost accepted that maybe they were right, that 70 was too old for dreams, too late for transformation. Instead, I typed, "Business valuation services near me." The results filled the screen. Professional firms that specialized in assessing the worth of small businesses. Not hobby appraisers, not fantasy evaluators. Real companies that dealt in real value. I clicked on the first link, then the second. By midnight, I'd filled out 3 different contact forms, requesting consultations to determine the actual worth of what I'd built. Death, not dreams, Jessica had said. We'd see about that. The memory faded, leaving me in the quiet of my office, more determined than ever to prove them wrong. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.